Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here, and welcome to another eMarketer Tech Talk, where we host guests from across ad tech, martech, and media. I'm Emmy Lederman. I'm an analyst at eMarketer, and today we're going to be learning about how to adjust your strategies for maximizing ad spend and proving the value of your media investments with the right approach to measurement. So let's meet our guests. We have Chip Malt, who is the co-founder and CEO of premium cookware brand Made In. Hi, Chip. And we have Alex Lawrence, who is the Vice President and Client Partner at Measured. Hi, Alex.
Hey, Emmy, how are you?
Good. So Chip and Alex have a great presentation for you, and afterwards we're going to open it up to Q&A. You can use the chat window to submit questions for the Q&A and to communicate with other audience members. So with that, Alex, over to you.
Great, thanks, Emmy. Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here with Chip. We have a quick overview of our agenda for today. So we're going to talk a little bit about how Measured approaches this challenge of full funnel optimization grounded in incrementality. We'll be sharing some really interesting insights from over 1,000 Google and Meta geotests. We'll be getting into some practical applications of this with a case study with Chip and the Made In team here, and then summarizing with some key actionable takeaways to implement today. Our goal would be for everyone to walk away from today's session with at least one piece of information that they can implement into their programs tomorrow to improve them. And we'll wrap here with some Q&A at the end. And so just a quick introduction on Measured for those who are not familiar with us. We are a media measurement and optimization platform. We've been doing this for 8 years. We're a holistic measurement solution. So we have a media mix model component that is calibrated with incrementality testing. This is all packaged into a forward-looking optimization engine for your entire media portfolio. We work with over 160 brands and have tested and optimized billions of dollars of media investment over the years. Chip, I'd love to hear from you about the brand that you built.
Yeah, so if you haven't heard about Made In, and obviously thanks for having me as well. We're an 8-year-old professional grade cookware company and kitchenware company, so spanning everything from stainless and non-stick and carbon steel lines down to wine glasses, plateware, like really anything you need to elevate your kitchen. We work both with direct to restaurants. We're in about 3,000 of the best restaurants around the world and over 1 million homes, and have been growing nicely.
Great. Thanks, Chip. So let's start today talking about what incrementality is. Some of you are probably very familiar with this. Some have probably heard of it, but not used it practically. Essentially, what incrementality is a measurement of the true causal impact of media on a business outcome. And so the fundamental issue here is that platform reported performance data is unreliable, and it's unreliable in different ways. If you think about the lower funnel media, that tends to be overcredited, due to one being closer to the point of purchase. So on a last click basis, tends to get more credit than it should. Two, as people move in market, there's more competition amongst the platforms to grab that conversion. And so they tend to double or triple count as you move down funnel. Whereas upper funnel tactics, they're by definition targeting an audience who is not yet aware of your brand and may take longer to purchase, and therefore are more likely to fall outside of a look back window or simply are targeted as a follow-on with other mid to low funnel ads that actually claim credit in the platform. And so what you have is a dynamic where the lower funnel is overcredited and the upper funnel is undercredited. And this problem really compounds as various platforms compete to target all of these in-market audiences to maximize that conversion. And so what incrementality does here is it removes this platform bias via what we call an adjustment factor. It's essentially an exchange rate that allows you to compare the performance equally across the platforms. And this exchange rate, this adjustment factor, isn't good or bad. It is simply a way for you to understand what percent of what the platform is reporting is actually incremental to our business. And so what you see here is a demonstration of this. You will see adjustment factor throughout, and essentially a $4 platform ROAS here, in this case, as a 75% adjustment factor. That means 25% of those conversions either would have happened anyway or happened because of something other than the tactic in question here. This translates to a $3 incremental ROAS. And so you can see numbers that are greater than 100%. So upper funnel media, for example, that may be undercredited, could be underreporting incremental conversions, whereas lower funnel media is likely going to be under 100% incremental. The smaller the number, the bigger the adjustment, the less incremental it is. And this is really a framework that we use throughout our entire offering. We land at this number using geo-testing that calibrates a media mix model to land at a number across the entire media mix. So that's an introduction to incrementality. Happy to go into that in the Q&A if you guys have questions on it. If you're not using incrementality testing, you will almost certainly be overallocated to the mid to the bottom of the funnel simply because that's what looks good in the platforms, whether you're using Google Analytics or the vendors themselves. There's likely, without applying this incrementality adjustment, you would likely to, you'd be more likely to allocate most of your budget into those things that look great. Well, what we at Measured have seen is several clear signs or symptoms that you are following this. You can see them here. Essentially, if you're seeing any of these, I would consider this essentially a red flag that some sort of intervention is needed immediately to get your media mix to a healthier place overall. And Chip, I would love to just hear your point of view. Before working with Measure, did you see any of these signs, or what other signs maybe did you see that indicated that you were not optimally allocating your budget?
Yeah, I think there's two parts of this that we'll touch on little bit later, but one of which is the media that mix that you're operating under driving the results you want, and then the second portion is, are you allocating the media mix correctly amongst the different parts of the funnel, lower, medium, middle, and high, or top of funnel, right? And so, and those all drive different symptoms here that are on this slide. But for us or companies that I've advised over the years, I think one of the biggest ones that probably resonate with the audience are, you run a sale period, say Black Friday or Memorial Day, and the 2 weeks following are really sluggish and slow, and it's essentially a pull forward in demand. And when you look at that kind of 4 week period adjusted, there's actually not really much incrementality of the sale you ran. You essentially just wiped the funnel, but had nothing else there to replace the users coming on in the period after. That tends to be a sign of misallocation across top, middle, and bottom of the funnel, and something that kind of incrementality can help with. And the second portion is kind of ineffectiveness of media spend, which tends to be low site visits, low stalled user growth, your email person complaining about email engagement dropping off, which tends to be a sign of, again, stalled new user growth, who are these new users who are very engaged with your brand. And so that tends to be, hey, just like the way we're allocating our dollars today are not driving the results that we want in the near term.
Great. Yeah, that makes sense. And we would say the treatment here is a more holistic framework to define success across the funnel, which we'll get into today. So at Measure, we take a pretty straightforward approach with our clients here. The first is to set goals and targets, both overall and by funnel position, that are specific to your brand. So you must define what success means to you. Two would be testing and validating that performance relative to the target, learning from those tests and making some optimizations. That cycle sort of repeats. What's really important to mention here is that if you look on a ROAS basis, it's sort of counterintuitive. And what we expect to see is something like on the right here, where if you look at top, middle, lower funnel on an incremental basis, after you've adjusted for incrementality, you should see top of funnel with a below average ROAS. As you move to the mid funnel, it should, perform right around average. And the bottom funnel, really highly conversion optimized campaigns, should perform better than average. This type of framework is really critical to properly allocate holistically across the funnel in an efficient way. And so if you're not seeing this pattern, it is likely a sign that you are either not spending enough in the right places, or what you think is really top of funnel, for example, is really more conversion optimized. And so this is a very interesting way to look at the media mix. If you're not seeing this pattern, this is another sign that I would indicate to you is worth better understanding. But really, awareness measurement is a challenge for marketers in a couple ways. One, many of them have not properly set this type of performance benchmark. So that upper funnel with a looser target and really mapping to an overall, financial goal isn't done in a lot of cases. And two, many of them just don't have the right tools in place to properly evaluate this and tie this spend to financial impact. But ultimately, every marketer knows that in order to grow, you need potential customers to know that you exist. And that is really done with awareness marketing. And Chip, I'd love to hear your point of view on how you guys have approached this, throughout your history.
Yeah, I think the hard part with a webinar like this is taking what we're saying and then thinking through how this directly applies to each individual company that's attending this, right? And it's that answer is different for this particular slide, depending on what stage you're at. If you are a $0 to $10 million brand, like you can probably get away with very little awareness marketing and a lot of mid and lower funnel marketing. As you get more into the 9-figure range, awareness becomes like absolutely crucial to building and scaling, right? Like you cannot survive 9 figures plus without any sort of awareness marketing as part of your mix. And that leap, wherever that transition happens, is different by category, by brand, by stage, by macro environment, like all the other stuff. But that leap is also super scary, and people are hesitant to do so because it means adding in a piece of the mix that's lower ROAS and higher incrementality and less visible, harder to attribute, like all that stuff. But at some point in your journey, it's a jump that has to be made.
Yeah, makes total sense. So as we talk about looking at the funnel and getting to some data from our portfolio of brands, we obviously can't talk about this without discussing Google and Meta. So these unsurprisingly accounted for a majority of spend amongst our clients last year. There's a really good reason for this. Over time, especially with things like PMAX and ASC, these have become really finely tuned conversion optimization machines. They take media spend and allocate it to maximize conversion rate. The challenge that you'll have as a marketer is you need quality measurement to ensure that what the platforms are reporting as conversions are actually incremental revenue and not simply targeting people with high underlying intent or very low funnel to look great in the platform. And so, it's important to optimize these, mid to low funnel channels, and you can tune them. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But they need to be tuned in a way, and you need to really, you know, make them work for you. The other part in gray here is everything else, partially upper funnel, sort of, the other non lion share of the spend, which we'll talk about in a bit.
Can
So,
I jump in
sorry,
there
Chip.
a
Yeah,
little,
go
a little
ahead.
bit off script? It wasn't on the script, but I think this is interesting. If you're relying on an agency and not running this in-house, there might be an actual disincentive for your or your incentives may not be aligned with your agencies, right? Like an agency is generally gold on a ROAS target, and not an incrementality target. And their incentive is to hit that ROAS target to continue their contract with you over time. And I would say the majority of people that I talk to in market do rely on external agencies to run performance marketing. And so you could actually be limiting your long-term scale of your brand by forcing them to deliver some sort of ROAS target that pushes you towards PMAX or ASC that's going to push you down funnel, and not kind of build that next growth area through awareness. So something to consider if you're on the agency side of things, I know this is off script, sorry, Alex, but is to move the goal towards an incrementality movement or an incrementality by stage of funnel portion as opposed to a strict easy ROAS target, because that could leave some unintended consequences.
Yeah, it's definitely great insight. We'll talk about some of these dynamics in a little bit. As we look at Meta and Google, we often get this question of how incremental are various things. And what you'll see here is what we found looking at the incrementality percentage or the adjustment factor that I mentioned before across the various tactics. And so what you'll see is that Meta and Google tend to over-report what I would call the conversion optimized mid to low funnel, and they under-report what I would call as awareness. So if you think about brand awareness or things like YouTube, these tend to be underreported in a lot of cases, given the part of the funnel they operate in and the purchase path that we've talked about. So, the key thing with platforms is platform data is almost always never as good or never as bad as it looks. And it's really important for you to make that work for you. And you'll see here PMAX and ASC, on average, they sit sort of right in the middle of this chart. You can set these campaigns up in a million different ways that would push it way to the left or way to the right. And how you're setting up and running those makes all the difference in the world as you're thinking about this. And so just keep in mind, as you move down funnel, you're going to see a smaller percent of those conversions be incremental. And as a result, what the platform reports will not be as good. Similarly, as you move up funnel, the platform is going to actually most likely underreport. And how this plays out and why it matters to you is that, platforms and other teams, to Chip's point, they tend to optimize to conversion rate and simply look, it may even have compensation, frankly, tied to certain ROAS targets or certain conversion rates. And this becomes really like a one-dimensional problem for them where they're just looking to spend the money, on the thing that has the highest conversion rate. Well, as you can see here, conversion rate and incrementality are inversely correlated. The things with the lowest conversion rate have the highest incrementality, and the things with the highest conversion rates have the lowest incrementality. And so this needs to be reframed really as a two-dimensional problem to solve, where you're not simply trying to maximize the conversion rate overall, but instead you need to understand the trade-off between conversion rate and incrementality in order for you to achieve your desired efficiency target, going back to what we talked about at the beginning. If you want a $2 ROAS overall or a $5 ROAS, whatever that number is, you need to make this calculation by funnel position appropriately. And Chip, as CEO, kind of expand on your earlier point, how do you think about this problem, not only from a media standpoint, but also just incentives or competition between various sales channels or teams? Incrementality tends to
Right.
fundamentally change the way a business is managed. I'd love to hear your point of view on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the positive of it is that it aligns everyone from finance to marketing, brand marketing, and performance marketing, which could be one or multiple teams within each organization, all along the same goal, which is to spend the media dollars incrementally effective. And something we've seen internally that has been not easy to break down is, everyone sits through their end of year review or their FP&A plan for the 2025 year, and web is comped or gold on increasing conversion rate by 10%. And then performance marketing is comped on ROAS going from, whatever, 3 to 3.1 or whatever it ends up being, right? And each one of these teams has a slightly different goal that actually is counterintuitive to something like moving up funnel to boost your long-term effectiveness and incrementality of your spend. That might actually drop conversion rate down from your 2 to 1.6, but long term wise, it's a better use of that dollar, right? And so, you know, one of the hardest things is that cultural change that needs to happen within most likely the e-com and performance marketing team with finance support, but across the business overall, like moving towards this mentality of non-wasted dollars is arguably the most important thing that a company can do. Because that can be recycled into incremental dollars or saved in the business to make yourself more profitable.
Yeah, we see it measured all the time. It's totally, if implemented appropriately, it changes the way the entire organization is run. And for most people, it's a fundamentally different way of evaluating media and running an organization.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
there are a lot
like
of implications
the
there.
general thing you hear from like agencies, right, is like, oh, you should have a 70-30 mix of top of funnel or uh like prospecting versus retargeting. Like that there shouldn't be a standard 70-30. Like it's different by brand. If you're a t-shirt company selling $19, it should be 99.1. If you're a huge, furniture company selling $3,000 bed, whatever, it should be 70-30, like whatever it is. But like all those are going to drastically change conversion rate. They're going to drastically change your growth and scale. Like it's just a totally different problem to solve for each company.
Yeah, totally. And we often get a question of, you may have incrementality measurement already in place as part of what you're doing, which is great, and in which case you have a good understanding of how to think about this. If you don't, there's sort of a general rule of thumb that we have seen it measured, looking at the data, be pretty consistent, which is that as you move up the funnel, the percent of conversions that are incremental tends to roughly double as you move up each funnel position. So, low funnel here, maybe call that 20 to 35% incremental. That's relatively low, meaning not that this is inefficient. This is just an exchange rate to get to an incremental ROAS. These low funnel tactics have a very high, unreasonably high in-platform ROAS. You might see 10 or 15 or $20 ROAS. This could very well still be efficient, but there's a much larger adjustment to be made there. As you move up to mid-funnel, typically somewhere 50 to 75%, and then as you get to the upper funnel, there tends to be a lot of undercounting going on. And so there's obviously nuance here. I don't want to say this is the answer for everyone. It depends a lot on your brand awareness, your media spend, your specific situation, but this is held up pretty well. And the important takeaway is that this type of framework or applying this type of adjustment, whether you're specifically measuring or just getting started up with it, is critical to properly set incremental ROAS targets at top, mid, bottom funnel for you to be successful. And the brands that do that have really dramatic impact. So we looked at all of our clients and the brands that we worked with 2024 versus 2023. Those who allocated more than 20% of their media to upper funnel grew on average 4 percentage points more than those who did not. That's not a 4% difference. That's the difference between a 0% and a 4% year-over-year growth, or a 10 and 14% growth. This is a really fundamental, major impact to a business. It also has an additional benefit of allowing you to spend more overall and seeing at least stable ROAS or potentially even improved ROAS as you feed the mid to low funnel and allow those conversion optimized campaigns to work well. And Chip, I know last year you significantly increased your spend and you essentially maintained a flat ROAS. I'd love to just kind of hear your perspective on, both of these points.
Yeah, I mean, it was huge for a financial model perspective because in our financial model, year over year, we anticipate some sort of degradation of ROAS as we kind of go along the growth curve, right? Like the next co the next incremental conversion is going to cost a little bit more than the one prior. So to be able to massively increase spend, I think we increased it around 20 or 30% year over year and have ROAS to be stable and then actually CACs to go down in some cases during peak periods of high volume um, was pretty instrumental in coming in beating our profitability goals last year. And then 4 percentage points, like, I mean, if you're sitting at 17%, like right now in the PE world, high growth in consumers considered 20, like that's the difference of flipping you over from being medium growth to high growth, just from 17 to 21. And that, adds another 5x on your multiple of how they value you or whatever it is, just falling into that different bucket. So it could be a pretty massive change depending on where you sit in your life cycle.
Yeah, super insightful there. And what I wanted to close on here before we talk about, Made In more specifically is we often get this question about like, what do I do about PMAX or ASC? These we call them AI channels. Performance Plus is another one that's kind of taken off. What we're seeing here is, these things are continuing to be a bigger part of the mix. And they're really powerful tools. So, by default, they're not good or bad. But you should understand that they, by default, are built to optimize conversion rate at scale and to essentially, you know, sell media at the end of the day. You can tailor these to optimize them for your end goal. But as we looked about earlier, conversion rate and incrementality are inversely correlated. So a really amazing conversion rate and platform probably means it's not as incremental as you think. And so, we have a couple stats here. If you look at PMAX, our clients who have excluded brand keywords from those saw an incremental ROAS that was 50% higher. And if you are considering like meta prospecting versus ASC, if you're just simply running ASC without any sort of strict audience exclusions, we found that a traditional meta prospecting campaign has a 30% higher incremental ROAS just because of the loss in incrementality from, optimizing for conversion rate and platform. And so these are powerful tools. It's effectively on you, though, to make them work best for your specific KPI that you're managing towards. I'm happy to take any questions on this one if it comes up, but wanted to shift now to talking about Made In. So, Chip, you came to us, end of Q2, middle of last year. I'd love to understand from your point of view, like what your challenges were with measurement and planning and kind of what you were looking to achieve in the second half of last year.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like it boiled down to just maintaining like unit economic profitability, inclusive of marketing, while continuing to scale is the overall kind of business goal, right? And then layer onto that, uh, the degradation of cookies and the difficulty of attributing via multi-touch or last touch or anything like that, like what's happening in the privacy world, to us kind of led us to the conclusion that incrementality testing is the only way to judge media at this point because you're losing sight of the clickstream or the clickstream is massively broken. And so we needed to find a way to measure without having to rely on a full multi-touch clickstream kind of solution. And so we implemented this. I mean, the other portion of it was we were running a lot of manual work ourselves. We were doing correlation studies on our TV spend and how that was driving brand search or brand or site traffic or some of these upper funnel things that we thought was going to tie or correlate to down funnel traffic later, and also like inventing metrics like cost per engaged user that we again thought was like a way to measure upper funnel to some sort of correlative behavior that will happen at some time later down funnel. And so really it was just for us a matter of time of like actually institutionalizing all those theories and kind of like bespoke metrics we were creating into something again that we could push across the organization because I don't think like finance wasn't going to understand cost per incremental engaged user. They just needed something that was a little bit more acceptable culturally.
Great. Yeah, super helpful. Another example I often see is, people optimizing to the tightest possible window, like a 1-day click in Facebook, just to sort of hack at incrementality. If you implement something like this, you can actually quantify the value of views and not overly constrain platforms, you know, to some hacked metric. So what, in practice, I want to know how this is a screenshot from within our platform directly. One of the key questions here was, as part of our testing roadmap that we implemented when we got started, we tested a lot of things. Facebook prospecting was one that kind of always just looked too good to be true in the platform. And we really wanted to validate, how incremental was this? And, what we found, we did 2 back-to-back tests towards the end of last summer. The first test came back surprisingly low. So it had an adjustment factor here under 50%, kind of below average of what we expect to see. We did some digging there and we found some signs of audience overlap. I think there were some creative questions, some existing customers sort of slipping through the exclusions that the team thought they had in place. We made some immediate changes with the Made in team and retested right away and saw incrementality go from 42% here to 124%. It's a massive shift essentially within a 30-day window. And that wrapped up right before the key holiday period. So the second test ended on November 1st. Chip, I'm curious to just hear your point of view. Like, how did this first initial test land with you being lower than expected? And how did you use that to make changes? And how did this set you up to be successful, in the holiday period?
Yeah. So, I mean, from a tactical standpoint, since I'm assuming a lot of people on the call are, you said everyone had to take away one piece of useful advice on this one. I mean, it was huge for us. Like we know Meta is going to make up an important portion of our funnel. And so that first test coming back to us being kind of destructive, exchange rate down to our platform, uh, said it was more about what we were doing than the platform not being incremental, because we obviously know it's a super effective platform. So audience segmentation is something that we are really focused on, but clearly we had some stuff fall through the gaps there. And then we made massive changes to our creative strategy. At this point, Facebook is recommending broad audiences and letting creative direct kind of where it's sending or picking the audiences based off the creative that's being uploaded, as opposed to you defining the segment that the creative is going to, right? And so we went to a much broader array of creative, a much faster and rapid testing environment of creative, and kind of those two. When you're close to the performance marketing world, you start to do that, and then you can just immediately in your gut see like the pie of media spend to revenue in your dailies, I would say, and then retesting that, it actually started to show up in the incrementality test as well. So I think a couple of good examples, like one of which is like tactics will massively affect different periods of your testing if those change, and then two, like don't just test once, and then like kind of write it into lore as Facebook is only dashes 2x. Is like taking credit for 2x the amount of conversions. It's actually okay. Let's retest these assumptions every 6 months or so.
Yeah, and I would actually say that that second comment is critical. Like the most interesting test results here are the ones that come back with a different answer than you expect, because it gives you an opportunity to change something and then revalidate it right away. It's kind of nice sometimes to just validate exactly what you thought, but the biggest impact is oftentimes coming from a test that lands flat. So that's not a failure by any means. The results here are pretty clear. Incrementality tripled. Facebook spend year over year was 300% higher. The revenue target, which is really at the end of the day measured, helps you hit and tie media to financial impacts, is a 22% beat of the revenue target that we had set going in. So,
And
great,
yeah,
great
I think why this
outcomes.
is important
Yeah.
too, like um, I'm sure everyone has this where like if you have a profitable first purchase, like what's your budget? Your budget's like infinity, right? Like obviously constrained on inventory, but we got to a point on Meta where it was beating our infinity spend level, and so having that ability to obviously scale up 3x, um, basically just moved all straight to the kind of top line for us, which was nice. I mean,
Yeah, that's another benefit is just having the confidence to lean into really aggressive spends. You can simulate that type of spending without having to make a case to, your CEO or CFO or CMO that, hey, I need to triple my spend on Meta next year, and they'll look at you like you're crazy. You can actually validate that kind of stuff with testing at a much lower risk level. So yeah, it's a really, really great outcome. Fun to be part of that. Chip, I'd love to just hear from you. Like, what are the key learnings from you working with Measured in sort of the last 6 to 9 months,
Yeah, yeah.
more broadly.
Um, I think we're probably in a different case. Like again, taking what we're talking about in the webinar and then self-reflecting, applying it back to the each user on this. Like we were probably under-indexed in meta compared to the average population. When I talk to brands, they're sitting there saying we're 80% meta. Like how do we diversify? When we went into that test, we were 25% meta, figuring out how to scale it, or wanting to scale it, right? And so like by 3xing it, it's getting us more in line with other brands in that like 50-50 range. So just kind of like if you're sitting at 80%, you might not want a 3x your spend. The For us, like I mean, again, the most important thing, it was easy for me to make this change culturally because I was running the performance team and I'm the CEO and founder. So like I could kind of just shove incrementality down the entire team's face and say this is what we're doing. But if you're on this call as the head of performance marketing, like there are cultural changes in kind of getting people on board cross-functionally that are important for adopting this methodology, but 100% pays off and um, kind of gets around a lot of those you know especially with finance, like is the media being spent in a way that is effective for the brand overall, right? Because the first thing and easiest thing to cut is a marketing budget um, of a P&L. So kind of like helps that conversation. And then for us, I think confidence in cutting lower funnel stuff, retargeting specifically. We were never really big believers in effectiveness retargeting, but this gave us that final proof point of cutting brand search spend, reallocating brand, like anything that we cut lower funnel, we immediately moved upper funnel and to kind of that flow of upper funnel to lower funnel just rapidly ends up boosting your growth rate overall, which then makes the whole thing a lot more fun overall. So those are the two biggest ones. Obviously, I'm sure people have questions around more specifics that we can leave time for.
Great. Yeah, and I wanted to summarize like what are some things that you could actually take away today more broadly to act on, and it's hard to say this is what everyone should do definitively, but what we typically see is somewhere around the 20 to 30% spend in of overall budget towards upper funnel awareness, reach optimized type campaigns to really fuel the mid to low funnel tends to be about right. It's, it can be higher, it can be lower, but it shouldn't be 5% is the point. There should be a meaningful investment there to allow you to scale. We've looked at billions of dollars of spend. Two is really setting specific performance targets that are grounded ideally in a unit economic basis. I really try to encourage people to move away from blended targets like CAC or advertising cost of sales or the marketing efficiency ratio. Like these are easy things to calculate, but they are really hard to scale because as you get more efficient and the percent of your business driven by media changes, the calculation there changes and it becomes sort of a circular, calculation you're trying to get to. So instead, try to understand, net of your specific margins and return rates. What do you need to be to be successful? If you're a 90% margin beauty brand, for example, it's a very different number than if you have 30%, gross margins in a high volume business. And so keep that in mind for you specifically. Everyone is different. Every business is different there. I need to make those work for you. This third one here is, the AI type campaigns, PMax, ASC, Performance Plus. These are really, really powerful, and this seems to be the direction that a lot of the platforms are moving. You just got to make them work for you and make sure they're pointed in the right direction. So just simply turning them on and setting it and forgetting it might work well, when you're just getting started. But as you get bigger and have a more complicated media mix, you need to be very intentional about how these are set up and really pick a part of the funnel, whether it's upper funnel or mid to low funnel you want them to play in. Do not just let them run full funnel alongside a lot of other manual campaigns. And then the final one is just really important, embracing like a scientific test and learn mindset. You should be asking tough questions. And if you're running tests and not getting any sort of surprising answers, it might be a sign that you're not asking the right questions. Or if you do see a sort of a flat test that comes back, or a lower than expected test like this Facebook one with Made In, treat that as an opportunity to make a change and then optimize to have really dramatic improvements. And so I think those four things probably are immediate action items that you can take We're happy to answer other questions as you have them. We have a couple resources here around the media mix model that we use and how we calibrate that with incrementality testing. You can see the case study in written form that we talked about today. Please reach out to us if you have any specific questions. We love talking about data, insights. We worked with a lot of different brands in many different industries and probably have some answers to questions you're thinking about.
Awesome. Chip and Alex, thank you so much for those insights. It was really interesting to hear you talk specifically about how when the marketing budget is the easiest thing to cut, sometimes it's really valuable to question these traditional approaches to measurement and understand that inverse correlation of conversion rate and incrementality. We've got a few questions from today's audience. First, a question for Chip. How do you understand what ROAS target is quote unquote good? And how should we decide how to evaluate upper funnel spend in that context?
Good question. In general, I agree with there's one of the slides that said like move away from ROAS and CAC targets as kind of the main metric. And in general, we move towards or we have moved towards contribution margin or contribution profit targets net advertising. So understanding of gross margin, promo spend, discounts, return rate, as Alex mentioned, down through the stack of contribution delivery all the way to okay, now take out your margin from media spend and shoot for that target. And in general, that can then let you, so let's say you're shooting for 10% profitability on first purchase or whatever it ends up being, you can generally then back into okay, that means 2.2, 2.3 ROAS for us on a new acquired purchase and 3.5 overall or whatever it ends up being and gives you like a little bit of a North Star. But especially in this day and age where everyone's being valued and a focus on profitability, I think that's the way you have to move because it makes you responsible for the full stack. And then, okay, now top of funnel, where do we have to, how much do we allocate there and how do we hold that to a different ROAS target? To us, that becomes doing the actual math around the ROAS by part of the funnel. And that means how much you can, if we're shooting for a 3.0 total and mid funnel is giving us 4 incremental and bottom of funnel is giving us 5 incremental and top of funnel is giving us 0.2, what does the math mean for a breakdown in each one of those to hit our global blended 3? And obviously, the better you can get the top of funnel from 0.2 to 0.4, the more you can spend up there and so on. But just making sure you're dialed in on that math, super important.
Yeah, I'd add to that too. Try to avoid conflicting targets. I sometimes see cases where a CFO is prioritizing profitability, the CMO just wants to prioritize, growth. This is another example where a leader, like a CEO, can come in and actually align the entire organization. It may not be possible to hit if you have a CAC target and a ROAS target. You might make very different decisions if you're optimizing to any one of those. If you're lucky, maybe you can do both, but really try to pick a priority target that you're trying to achieve because the more complexity you add and potential conflicts there, the harder it is to actually act, and it tends to lead to some sort of paralysis when you're looking to make a decision.
And this is an interesting question for both of you. I think maybe we can start with Alex, but how would you recommend thinking about incrementality measurement for conversions that happen offline? So the example this person gave was driving in-store sales and foot traffic from digital media campaigns.
I can take how we would tackle that, Chip, and then I'd love to hear sort of your point of view. At Measured, we have a holistic, I mentioned we're a holistic measurement solution, right? We have a media mix model that looks at a broader trend, at relationships between inputs and the output. That output that you measure can be e-commerce sales, it can be retail sales. Essentially, if you have a consistent data set over time, really taking an omni-channel approach to measurement is really important. We've seen some really interesting insights there. You can also leverage geo-testing to supplement that model, and that's what Measure does, right? So we'll look at how things like TikTok impacts the website, but also impacts Amazon or retail sales. And generally, like more upper funnel type metrics tend to have a bigger halo effect to other sales channels. Lower funnel stuff like PMAX, optimized very heavily to on-site conversion rate, tends to have most of the effect felt more tightly on that event, but there's still some halo there. So for us at Measured, it's about omni-channel measurement It's taking a media mix model, calibrating that with causal testing inputs across multiple sales channels. That is how we would do it. And Chip, I don't know what your thoughts are on this.
You stole my thunder. I mean, I think culturally too, and like budget wise, right? Like, you know, it's an interesting concept where right now our Amazon team has a budget and our DTC team has a budget and our wholesale team has a budget, Excel on it and all that stuff, right? And actually, the best use of spend might actually be to consolidate all those and go up funnel. Obviously, brand search, right now our Amazon team is very happy to get these 20,000 free brand searches on Amazon per month, and it's now their free dollar amount that they then build the bottoms up off of. But that's obviously coming from and being it really is being driven by the DTC's burden of their media spend, both on TV and Facebook and things like that. And so we're working on, and through this incrementality approach, consolidating those budgets so that you can get to a more optimal full funnel approach across all the omni channels versus having multi-siloed budgets that will inevitably, to optimize only each one in their own bubble will not be the same conclusion as if you optimize them as a whole.
Yeah, one thing to add to that too is to the bigger extent this is happening, that may impact your ROAS targets. So if Amazon or wholesale has different margin assumptions, right? You may need to modify that target if you're taking that holistic view. So it's just another important consideration.
Yeah, I'll give you a good example. Like our on a certain category that we're pretty deep into on Amazon, like our incremental brand search or sorry, non-branded search on Amazon is 1.5 ROAS on that search. And so it's like it's not profitable anymore. And we've kind of like just stopped spending once we hit that marker. um, I guarantee you, and it is more profitable for us to scrape away those dollars and go spend on a zero point 0.7 DTC one top of funnel thing that actually then spreads brand search across all the channels. And so that allocation of dollars is again going towards net profitability, net advertising, which should be the global goal of everyone, right?
And
Yeah.
we have another question for Chip. What was the most surprising finding from testing with Measured?
Um, Most surprising finding, well, most least surprising was that brand search is stupid and you shouldn't do it. And like programmatic retargeting down funnel is stupid and you shouldn't do it. So like if you're doing any of those and like coupon and like affiliate coupon sites are dumb too. So like just scrape all those away. You just save yourself 20 grand a month. Congrats. And then so then the question is like up funnel, what's super important for us? TV changed over time to the point of like making sure we're retesting every 6 months. Like TV has a time and place for us depending on our seasonality, but it isn't an always on 20% of our spend every time. And moving it's almost like you're bastardizing TV if you then go for like a programmatic TV approach where you're trying to move down funnel with TV because the whole purpose is to be up funnel. CPMs will go up. It'll be more expensive. Now you're competing with the same audience that Facebook's competing with. It's kind of not using the channel for its intended purpose within the funnel. So again, like I think a couple of those things were super surprising and showed out in the incrementality test.
Yeah, just on the brand search piece. I mean, if you have a $50 platform ROAS, you can have a 10% adjustment factor. Basically, 90% of those conversions would have happened anyway. It can still be profitable. And so I think what Chip is saying is you just need to be aware if there is that big adjustment, you need to know that math for you. There is likely, an opportunity, especially if you're using something like Google Analytics and taking that at face value, you're almost certainly spending more money on things like PMAX or brand search than you probably should be. But it can still be profitable, and there's still probably a place, in the mix for it. It a lot of times isn't as big as where you're currently at.
Sure. I think you don't think through the platform. You think a lot about the platforms cannibalizing each other or double attributing. You actually don't think a lot about the platform cannibalizing itself down funnel. So you see a YouTube ad uh, within the same account, then you search the brand and click the brand search. Like in your dashboard, Google just cannibalized its YouTube self for brand search when actually that is a YouTube conversion. So I think like most people are like, oh, like Facebook is stealing credit for TV or whatever it ends up being. It's actually like lower funnel Facebook is also stealing credit for upper funnel Facebook in a lot of ways.
And we just last point on brand search too. We've seen some interesting findings where competitors will come in during seasonal moments and really conquest heavily that is a very interesting trend. If you're seeing that happen, it's an important thing to validate with testing. We've seen, pretty different incrementality results if you have, your top two biggest competitors all of a sudden really bidding hard on your terms. And other times of year, no one bids. Yeah, I think it's just an important dynamic to understand.
So we have time for a few more questions. This is one for both. Maybe Alex, you can start us off. Many marketers are afraid to switch to upper funnel media because it tends to perform badly in the short term, but starts to perform very well in the long term. How long does it typically take for brands to see a positive change after switching more into the upper funnel?
Yeah, we get this question a lot. So there's, the way that we approach it at Measured is when we run our tests, we tend to focus on, shorter term tests. A brand test might be longer than average. Maybe it goes to 8 or 10 weeks, to look to see how that's building over that time. But essentially, we advocate our clients to set a looser target at the top of the funnel to validate that it does something in the short term. The ROAS can't be zero on a 30 or a 60-day basis, but it's never going to be as efficient as something like brand search just due to the nature of it. So being okay with that short-term goal and sort of taking the leap to sort of balance the mix in the right way over the longer term, if you were to look at like 6 or 12 months, you'll tend to see everything sort of rise as you're more properly allocated. So as one side effect here will be as you're increasing your spend, dramatically year over year. Made in, for example, spending 30% more year over year. They saw a stable ROAS. They probably wouldn't have seen that had they not been properly allocated. If they didn't fill that top of the funnel, 6 to 12 months later, they would lean in to brand search or PMAX and simply just see conversion rate tank, or the CPCs or CPMs, skyrocket as you're going after a smaller audience. So that's sort of like the balance of measuring something short term and then taking more of a qualitative view long term. Chip, I don't know how else you would think about it.
I mean, I think some of this stuff has to just be a cultural change internally, which is tough from a performance, like a heavily performance marketing brand. And I say that coming from that being my background, like we talk a lot about competitive advantage and arbitrage opportunities, and there is zero arbitrage in brand search or anything I mean, Facebook at this point, mid funnel, down funnel, right? Like that stuff is dialed, it's competitive, it's a perfect market. And where there are opportunities are in upper funnel where people are afraid of the ineffectiveness of it or whatever it ends up being. And sure, there's a lot of also money to be wasted up there too of ineffective stuff. And we've wasted a shit ton of it. But that's also where you'll find, okay, a $1 CPM on TV or radio, for instance. So you're comparing that against a $22 CPM on mid-funnel Facebook. Is Facebook really 22 times more effective per dollar than radio? Like, okay, that is a good gut check. And then like, how do we measure that, right? And so like clearly there's some um like that to me, that's where the value is. That's where the arbitrage is in that kind of like blind spot area. And then internally you have to figure out, okay, how are we going to measure it? What are the things that make us feel good and confident about that? What's the max percentage of our budget that we can push up there before we start to dilute out um, the ROAS targets we need for the board or the company or the profitability or whatever it ends up being. But it's an exercise worth going through.
There's another extension of this. Oftentimes, direct mail is a big part of a lot of our brands' media mix, and that can be really, really effective with certain segments. It's very expensive, so it tends to be
It's like
500 to $1,000.
220, yeah, CPM, like 500
Yeah, it's like
$500 CPM,
$500,000
$200.
CPM. So if you think about
Yeah,
like the prospecting play, you can probably find somewhere in your mix where you can carve out some of that money and literally get something that is 50 times cheaper and probably more efficient at an awareness-based play. So you look like within your mix too, where there's areas to cut to move more efficiently up funnel without having to say, hey, I need $1 million extra dollars. You can probably cut
yeah,
some within your current mix.
totally.
So we have time for one more question. Chip, how have your learnings on incrementality shaped what you look for when hiring for your marketing team? In general, how do you think about the value of hard versus soft skills?
Yeah, so we try and combine, or we do combine our performance and brand team. The internal mantra here, which our CMO is awesome coined, was um, if performance isn't pushing the brand forward, it's not performing. If brand isn't performing, like brand marketing isn't performing, it's not performing. Like those two should be cycling each other. And um, so like obviously the soft versus hard skills come into that, right? Where like brand tends to lead a little bit more soft, more creative, like developing the campaigns, et cetera. Performance team, we expect to be a lot more technical. I think in this time period right now, one, we always look for people who have done stuff internal versus rely on agencies, because they tend to have developed a better internal skill set. And then two, I think now more than ever, um, understanding of all the really boring nitty gritty stuff around cookie loss and what's that doing, and how is that affecting attribution, and Facebook moving from probabilistic attribution from deterministic over the past few years, and what does that mean, and PMAX, and how does it actually work? Like all that stuff can lead you towards, if you don't understand it, can lead you towards mass misallocation of budget and like assuming the wrong thing. And so from a performance side, one, I think you don't need as many performance marketers as you did 5 years ago, because it's more of a creative game at this point, and channel management is not hard, but understanding the technicalities and technical components of where privacy is going is unbelievably important. So we learn very heavy on technical on that side.
Chip and Alex, thank you again for this great content and answering all the questions from the audience. We really appreciate it. Before we wrap up, let me take a moment to tell you about eMarketer's media channels. So you can register for live analyst and tech talk webinars on our events page at emarketer.com/events. And don't forget to check out our various podcasts. We have Behind the Numbers, Reimagining Retail, and the Banking and Payments Show. And you can listen everywhere you find podcasts and watch on Spotify and eMarketer's YouTube channel. And finally, please subscribe to our newsletters. Thank you all for joining us today, and thanks again to Chip, Alex, the team at Measured, and our eMarketer Studio team behind the scenes for making this webinar possible. We'll see you at our next Tech Talk.